When the Texas National Guard stopped the first federal convoy, nobody thought it was just a roadside check. They stood 47 kilometers north of the El Paso border crossing, on Interstate 10. 4 Humvees blocked the road, Texas flags on them, but no American flags. The federal convoy's 16 trucks full of ICE agents and equipment stopped, engines hissing, the air stretched tight as wire. Convoy commander, Captain Morris Henderson, 53, Iraq veteran. He opened the radio. "This is a federal operation. Clear the road." The voice coming back was young, but cold. "You're on Texas soil. By order of Governor Abbott, unauthorized movement of federal military units within the state is prohibited. Turn back." Henderson's hand didn't shake. He hit the gas. The trucks moved forward. The first bullet hit the truck's front tire. It blew. The truck swerved, rolled onto its side. Henderson grabbed the radio. "We're taking fire! Texas Guard opened fire!" But no response came from Washington, because at that moment, the same scene was playing out in 12 other states. Only 16 days had passed since the bullet fired into Renee Good's head in Minneapolis. The Free America walkout had filled the streets. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis accused the White House of federal tyranny on national television. The governors of Texas, Arizona, Louisiana, Montana backed him up. Operation Metro Surge must be stopped, they said. Trump didn't back down. January 23rd, the Insurrection Act was signed. While 50,000 people screamed in the Minneapolis streets at -29 degrees, Trump moved his pen in the Oval Office. The military could enter states without governor's permission. "Anarchy is over," he'd said. But anarchy was just beginning. The Texas legislature convened that same night. At 2:47, the Texas Guard activation bill passed. At 06, 0 inches the morning, the gates of Fort Hood Military Base in Austin closed. Entry banned for federal personnel. Texan soldiers stayed inside. Those outside stayed out. For the first time, American soldiers aimed guns at each other, but no triggers had been pulled yet. In Florida, the situation was stranger. DeSantis declared all federal buildings in Jacksonville state security zones. Tallahassee police entered the FBI office, sealed the files. FBI agents didn't leave the building. 18 hours of staring each other down. Guns holstered. Nobody breathed. Television didn't show this at first. CNN said tensions. Fox News said states' rights. MSNBC said coup attempt. But you know what the man on the street said? Nothing. Because the man on the street was buying canned goods at Walmart. Because the man on the street was waiting in line at gas stations. Because the man on the street was asking on internet forums, which state is safe? Idaho, Wyoming, and Alaska signed the Texas Declaration. The declaration stated, "The federal government has violated the Constitution. It is no longer legitimate." The words were heavy. The words were bloody. We'd last heard these words in 1861, January 26th. In Washington, D.C., the Pentagon went into emergency session. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Peter Maddox, hadn't slept for 48 hours. In front of him was a map. Red states: Texas, Florida, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Alaska, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. Blue states: California, New York, Illinois, Massachusetts. Gray. The undecided. Maddox held a report in his hand. 73% of Texan soldiers at Fort Hood said they'd side with the state. The MacDill Air Force Base commander in Florida refused to obey federal orders. Navy pilots in Pensacola didn't take their planes up. "The military is divided," Maddox said. The 12 generals at the table stayed silent. Because their children wore those same uniforms too, and nobody knew which flag those children would choose. Nobody slept on the streets of Austin that night. 15,000 people gathered in front of the Texas Capitol building, with their guns, with AR-15 seconds, with Texas flags in their hands. with "Come and take it" banners. Some were crying, some were laughing. Nobody understood what was happening, but everyone knew something broke tonight, and it would never be the same again. In Miami, the Cuban community poured into the streets. "DeSantis is our leader," they shouted. In Little Havana, American flags came down. Florida flags went up. Police didn't intervene, because the cops were carrying the same flags. In New York, things were completely different. A Preserve the Union rally was held in Times Square. 80,000 people gathered. They carried signs reading, "Hang the traitors." They supported the federal government. But New York Governor Kathy Hochul was very quiet, because she knew, if fighting broke out, where would New York's food come from? Texas. Florida. The first blood spilled on the morning of January 27th. Location: Brownsville, Texas. Federal Border Patrol agents refused to surrender to the Texas Guard. Fighting broke out. 4 federal agents died. 2 Texas soldiers wounded. The bodies were taken to Houston morgues. Nobody told the families anything, because which country would they mourn for? A statement came from the White House: "Terrorists will be punished." Trump gave Texas Governor Abbott an ultimatum: "Surrender within 24 hours, or Texas will be occupied." Abbott responded, but not with words. Texas Air Force F-16 seconds took off. They patrolled the skies, Texas skies, against federal aircraft, against American aircraft. Nobody pulled the trigger that day, but everyone knew tomorrow it would be pulled. January 28th, for 13 hours. Fort Bliss, Texas. Major Sarah Reeves, 34 years old, mother of 2, 12-year soldier. She received the order at morning shift change: cross the Texas border, advance on Austin. The order came from the Pentagon, but Reeves's family was in Lubbock, in Texas. She looked at the 160 soldiers in her unit. Half were Texan, the other half weren't. "Who's coming with me?" she asked. Silence. Then a private stood up, then another, then 10 people, then 50, but 110 soldiers kept sitting. "What are you going to do?" Reeves asked. A young lieutenant answered, "I'm going to fight for Texas." He tore the U.S. insignia from his uniform, threw it on the ground. Reeves touched her weapon but didn't draw it, because this kid was under her command yesterday. Today, he was the enemy. Nobody knew what tomorrow would bring. Fort Bliss split in 2 that morning. Federal soldiers exited the west gate, Texas soldiers the east gate. 2 convoys moved in opposite directions, only 300 meters between them. Nobody looked back, because if you look back, you cry. That day at the Houston port, cargo ships were stopped. The Texas Coast Guard, which hadn't existed 2 days earlier, refused docking permission to federal vessels, closed the port. Inside were 17 million barrels of oil, the federal government's oil, but now it was in Texas's hands. The White House went crazy. Treasury Secretary Mark Sullivan held an emergency press conference. Economic embargo will be imposed on Texas. Federal banks will be closed. Dollar flow will be cut off. Texas Governor Abbott responded the same day. Texas will print its own money. At midnight, the Texas legislature passed the Texas dollar bill, digital currency, blockchain-based, backed by oil and gold. Wall Street didn't take it seriously. But the next day, all ATMs in Texas switched to Texas dollars. People started using this money because there was no other choice. Florida made the same move. Florida Digital Credit, backed by tourism and agriculture. Banks in Miami left the federal system. This wasn't chaos. It was a planned breakaway. January 29th, California Governor Gavin Newsom announced full support for the federal government. California will preserve the Union. But protests exploded on the streets of Los Angeles. Because half the people in LA were running their cars on gas from Texas, and the gas was gone. In Sacramento, the California National Guard hit the streets, but not against looters, against protesters. At 19, fighting broke out on Hollywood Boulevard. 7 people died, 33 wounded. CNN called it anarchist uprising. Fox News said freedom struggle. The truth? It was neither, just hunger and fear. Minneapolis was already hell. 19 days had passed since Renee Good's death. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz supported the federal government, but the streets weren't listening to him. National Guards surrounded the city center, but what they surrounded were their own citizens. The night of January 30th was the bloodiest night in Minnesota history. In downtown Minneapolis, federal units faced off against armed protesters. Who fired first? Does it matter? In 30 minutes, 120 people died. Lake Street burned. The next morning, half of Minneapolis was ash. Texas watched this savagery and made a decision. January 31st. Austin, Texas capital. Governor Greg Abbott stepped to the podium. Behind him was the Texas flag. No American flag. "I address my people," he said. His voice trembled, but was resolute. "The federal government has trampled the Constitution, ignored states' rights, killed its citizens. We no longer accept this tyranny." He paused. The hall held its breath. "As of this hour, the Republic of Texas declares its independence." The words hung in the air. Nobody applauded. Nobody shouted, because everyone knew this sentence meant war. Florida made the same announcement that same day. Idaho, Wyoming, Alaska followed. 5 states. In one night, the United States cracked. The response from the White House came quickly. At 23:47, President Trump addressed the nation. "This is treason, and treason is punished with blood. Federal forces are ordered to enter Fort Hood, MacDill, Pensacola bases. Anyone who resists will be considered a traitor and tried by military tribunal." But this order was never carried out, because half the generals in the Pentagon weren't answering the phone, because the military wasn't the military anymore. It had fractured. February 1st, the first real war began. Location: Louisiana, Mississippi border. Federal 82nd Airborne Brigade moved to enter Louisiana. Louisiana Guard blew up the bridge. Federal forces stopped, but there were no more bridges to stop the units coming from behind. Fighting started in the afternoon. Near Baton Rouge, tank sounds heard. American tanks against American soldiers. The first artillery shot was fired at 14:22. It came from Louisiana militia. Federal tank hit. 3 soldiers inside died. Retaliation came instantly. Federal artillery opened fire on Louisiana positions. In the 40-minute bombardment, 150 people died. Most civilians, because the positions were inside the city. Baton Rouge burned that night. By morning, 5,000 people were dead. American killing American. And the world watched. The European Union held an emergency meeting. "We call on the parties to dialogue," they said. Russia and China stayed quiet, but they smiled, because America was eating itself. Texas completely closed its borders. The refugee flow from Oklahoma began. Hundreds of thousands of people fleeing south. But at the Texas border, there were wire fences, Texas Guard, and no crossing allowed. "Resources are limited," said the Texas Secretary of the Interior. "We can't take everyone," and they didn't. Refugee camps were set up on the Oklahoma side. People died of starvation, froze below zero. Nobody helped, because nobody had the strength to help anymore. Panic began in New York. Supermarket shelves emptied. Trucks weren't coming from Texas anymore, weren't coming from Florida. Dock workers went on strike. The NYPD couldn't control the streets. Looting started in Manhattan. Mayor Eric Adams requested federal aid. But the federal government was busy, protecting its own capital, because protests had started in Washington, D.C. too. February 3rd, 100,000 people gathered in front of the White House. "Stop the war," they screamed. But inside, Trump wasn't listening, because there was no turning back now. That night, the first nuclear weapons threat came. Not from a foreign country, from Texas. February 4th, 2:34 hours. Pantex facility, Amarillo, Texas. Thousands of nuclear warheads were stored here. Half of America's nuclear arsenal on Texas soil. And Texas wasn't America anymore. Facility commander, Colonel Marcus Webb, 59 years old, post-Vietnam generation, never saw war, but learned war to his bones. Near dawn, he saw the Texas Guard surrounding the facility. He picked up the phone, called the Pentagon, busy, called the White House, busy, called Strategic Command. Nobody answered. The Texas Guard commander approached the gate, spoke through a megaphone. "Colonel Webb, your facility is being taken under Republic of Texas control. Personnel will be evacuated. In case of resistance, lethal force will be used." Webb looked at his weapon, then looked at the 87 federal soldiers at the facility, then looked at the 500 Texas soldiers outside. The math was simple. "Open the gates," he said. At 6, Pantex facility came under the Texas flag. One of the world's largest nuclear arsenals was now in the hands of a secessionist state. Silence fell in the White House briefing room, because this wasn't just rebellion anymore. It was an existential threat. Trump assembled the National Security Council that morning. Defense Secretary Lloyd McKenzie slammed his fist on the table. "We have to take back Pantex. Now," CIA Director Rachel Morse objected. "If we attack there, there's a radiation leak risk. We could turn Amarillo into Chernobyl." "What are you suggesting?" "That we let Texas have nuclear weapons," McKenzie shouted. Morse locked eyes. "Texas already has them." The room froze. Trump leaned forward. "Bomb Pantex." Nobody spoke, because this order meant bombing American soil, killing American citizens. The generals looked at each other. Nobody moved. "Didn't you hear me?" Trump roared. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General Maddox stood up, spoke slowly. "Mr. President, I cannot carry out this order." Trump froze. "What did you say?" "You cannot order the American military to bomb American soil. The Constitution doesn't allow it." Trump's face went bright red. "You're fired." Maddox removed the stars from his uniform, left them on the table. "I was resigning anyway." And he walked out. That day, 23 generals resigned from the Pentagon. The military had collapsed. In Florida, the situation was even stranger. The nuclear submarine base at MacDill Air Force Base had also come under Florida control. 3 Ohio-class submarines, each carrying 144 Trident II missiles. Each missile with 14 nuclear warheads. DeSantis went on television, smiled. "Florida is now a nuclear power, and it will defend itself." The world went insane. The UN Security Council convened urgently. France, Britain, Germany proposed intervention in American Civil War. Russia vetoed. China vetoed, because chaos served their interests. February 6th. The first air raid took place. Federal F-35 seconds entered Texas airspace. Target: Austin government buildings. But Texas F-16 seconds were in the air. Dogfights began over the Dallas skies, American pilots hunting each other. The first plane shot down was federal. The pilot ejected safely, landed on Texas soil. Local militia found him, didn't lynch him, but arrested him, called him a prisoner of war. The second plane to fall was from Texas. The pilot didn't survive, crashed into the ground, in the Richardson suburbs. At the impact point, 12 houses vanished. 43 civilians died. Nobody said we won that day. They just said we lost. Because the dead were Americans. All of them. In Minnesota, things were at the breaking point. The Federal Army had completely surrounded Minneapolis. No way in or out of the city. 2 million people inside. Food was gone. Electricity cut. Hospitals full. Governor Tim Walz made a surrender call. Put down your weapons. Let there be no bloodshed. But nobody listened, because the streets of Minneapolis were soaked with Rene Good's blood, and it hadn't been forgotten. February 7th, the Federal Army entered the city. House-to-house clearing operations began. Weapons searches. Terrorist searches. But the definition was broad. Every protester was a terrorist. Every dissident was a terrorist. Every Texas sympathizer was a terrorist. First day, 1,400 people arrested. Second day, 3,000. Third day, only the dead were counted. Because arrests had ended, executions had begun. Mass graves were dug on Lake Street. Bodies pushed by bulldozers. CNN didn't show it, because CNN reporters had been removed from Minneapolis. Only independent citizen cameras filmed. Video leaked. The world saw, and couldn't believe it. Is this America? Asked Germany's Die Welt newspaper. This is the end of American civilization, said Britain's Guardian. But the most accurate headline was from France's Le Monde. L'Empire s'effondre. The empire collapses. Starvation had begun in New York. Fighting at supermarkets. Knives drawn over a can of food. People pitched tents in Central Park. But police tore those down too. Illegal, they said. Where should we go? They asked. Not my problem, said the police. On the Brooklyn Bridge, there was a suicide epidemic. 20 or 30 people jumping per day. The fire department wasn't coming to rescue anymore, because there were no resources left to save anyone. Half of Manhattan was dark. Power outages. Generator fuel was gone. Wall Street closed. Markets collapsed. The dollar lost 40% of its value. Bitcoin gained 300%, because people trusted digital now, not the state. In California, internal conflict exploded. Northern California rebelled against Sacramento's government. We support Texas, they said. The State of Jefferson movement armed itself. A referendum on independence was held in Northern California. 63% voted yes. California split into 3. Los Angeles in the south, Jefferson in the north, Sacramento in the middle, and all 3 declared war on each other. America had split into 20 pieces, and the blood wouldn't stop. February 9th. An announcement came from Pantex facility, signed by the Texas Department of Defense. If the federal government continues military intervention on Texas soil, we reserve the right to nuclear response. The world held its breath. A response came from the White House. Texas has no nuclear capability. This is a bluff. But it wasn't a bluff. February 11th. 11:47 hours. Nevada Desert Test Site. The Republic of Texas conducted an underground nuclear test. The shock wave was felt in Las Vegas. Radiation levels rose. Satellite images leaked. The UN confirmed. Texas had become a nuclear power. Trump was alone in the palace that night. His generals had left. His cabinet had resigned. Even his security detail had shrunk. He sat alone in the Oval Office. The door opened. Vice President J.D. Vance entered. His face was cold. "I'm placing you under arrest," he said. Trump's eyes widened. "What?" 25th Amendment. "We've determined the president is unable to perform his duties. Your term is over." Who made this decision? The remaining cabinet, the remaining generals, and me. Secret Service agents entered. They took Trump by the arms, led him out. He didn't resist, because there was no army left to resist with. February 12th. J.D. Vance became president. His first act was to open ceasefire negotiations with Texas. But Texas didn't come to the table. Florida didn't come. Idaho didn't come, because there was no turning back now. America was finished. What came in its place? Nobody knows. Because it's still being written. In blood and ash. Do you remember the day the dollar disappeared? The moment you stole the last can from Walmart? The time your neighbor's corpse lay in the street for 3 days? You don't remember. Because remembering is a luxury now. Even survival is a luxury. Now you have a Republic of Texas passport. You shop with your Florida digital credit. And at night when you sleep, you still hear it. The distant sound of artillery. Because the war didn't end. Television just stopped showing it.